The front lines in Ukraine are a world away from peace talks. Ukrainian troops face drones, snipers and minefields, forcing them to remain on constant alert, according to a report in the New York Times. This is why the commander of the 33rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Colonel Dmitry Palisa, called on his soldiers not to relax due to talk of a possible ceasefire. They are starting to relax. They are starting to change their minds. They are putting on rose-colored glasses. They are thinking that tomorrow will be easier. No, he said at a command post on the Eastern Front, we are shooting until we get the order to stop. As Western leaders debate a potential ceasefire, bloody fighting continues on the front lines. The standoff between Ukraine and Russia continues unabated, with both sides trying to improve their positions in preparation for further negotiations. The Trump administration claims progress in diplomatic efforts, but most military and civilians in Ukraine remain skeptical. President Volodymyr Zelenski warns that Russia is preparing for new offensive operations. They want to put maximum pressure on Ukraine and then issue ultimatums from a position of strength, he said last week. Despite the numerical and technical superiority of the Russians, Ukrainian troops have managed to stop their advance and are even carrying out local counterattacks. Military experts confirm that the pace of the Russian offensive has slowed significantly, although attacks on important positions continue. On the front lines, Ukraine's military attributes its resilience to several factors: improved defensive strategies, increased use of drones, rapid adaptation to new threats, and improved morale following the appointment of General Mikhailo Drapati as ground forces commander. This war is constantly changing the rules, notes Colonel Palisa, which means we must constantly adapt. Every night, before we go to bed, we must already plan an alternative strategy for tomorrow. The fighting is particularly fierce in eastern Donbas, where Russia has yet to fully capture the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Colonel Palisa controls a defensive line near Pokrovsk, where Russian troops were able to advance last year. However, thanks to smart tactics and the active use of drones, Ukrainian forces were able to hold off the enemy. Over the past 3 to 4 weeks, the enemy has not advanced a single meter in this direction, he notes. Now we can say that we have stabilized the situation. However, the Ukrainian military faces new challenges, including the proliferation of Russian drones that use ultra-thin fiber optic cables, making them impossible to neutralize electronically. Ukrainian troops have adapted their methods of movement, switching from armored vehicles to quad bikes, buggies, or even walking routes. Soldiers wear special cloaks that hide the heat signature of drones with thermal imaging cameras. Protective nets have been placed along strategic routes, which Palisa says have cut the success rate of enemy attacks by more than half. Soldiers have also begun to use sniper rifles more frequently. This creates a unique post-apocalyptic landscape where tanks and armored personnel carriers are combined with civilian cars, motorcycles and ATVs equipped with protective cages and mufflers. On the front lines, talk of peace looks like a dangerous illusion. The military is convinced that the fighting will continue until the war becomes too expensive for the Kremlin and Ukraine has enough forces to contain the aggressor.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife will be visiting an American military base in Greenland. According to Associated Press, they left from Joint Base Andrews on Friday morning. The visit on Friday was revised after an initial 3-day trip to the semi-autonomous Danish territory created uproar among Greenlanders and Danes who were irked that the travel plans were announced without previous consultation. Relations have been tense after President Donald Trump repeatedly suggested that the United States should in some form control the mineral-rich Danish territory. The one-day visit to the U.S. Space Force outpost at Putler, on the northwest coast of Greenland, has removed the risk of potentially violating diplomatic custom by sending a delegation to another country without an official invitation.
US Special Envoy Richard Grenell believes that Ukraine never had nuclear weapons, and the arsenal it once had always belonged to Russia. Politicians and diplomats have reacted emotionally to these statements, according to the politician's social media page on the platform X. In his post, the diplomat decided to clarify the situation with the Budapest Memorandum. The nukes were Russia's and were leftovers. Ukraine gave the nukes back to Russia. They weren't Ukraine's. This is an uncomfortable fact. Grenell wrote, "This position of Donald Trump's special envoy sparked a resonant reaction on social media X among politicians and diplomats. In particular, former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Pfeiffer, stated that Grenell was categorically wrong. The diplomat who helped negotiate the Budapest Memorandum added that the nuclear warheads in Ukraine were former Soviet, not Russian. Nuclear warheads in Ukraine were ex-Soviet, not Russian. Warheads in storage were in sole Ukrainian custody. ICBMs and bombers were eliminated in Ukraine except a small number sent to Russia for debt relief," the diplomat wrote. He emphasized that Ukraine decided to send the nuclear warheads to Russia for disposal, largely because Moscow had committed to respecting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and not using force against the country. He advised Grenell to study history in full. Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger expressed strong criticism of Grenell. "They were Soviet, you ignorant ass helmet," he wrote. "So they were equally Ukraine's as Russia. This is day one knowledge." Kinzinger added that the nuclear weapons were Soviet and were inherited by the countries where they were stationed: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus and Kazakhstan. However, operational control over the strategic weapons remained with Russia. British politician and former leader of the UK Independence Party, Henry David Bolton, also expressed his outrage. This man, despite his 1.7 million followers, has his facts completely wrong. Either that or he's intentionally deceiving you. Those nukes were absolutely not Russian. They were inherited by Ukraine when the Soviet Union broke up. Don't believe me? Then do your own research, he said. Ukraine inherited the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world after the US and Russia from the Soviet Union. In the early 1990s, the country possessed around 2,000 nuclear weapons, including intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers for their delivery and launch. On December 5, 1994, Ukraine, the US, the UK and Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum. Under the agreement, Ukraine voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from the signatories. Specifically, Russia pledged to respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from threats of force or its use against the country. Moscow also promised to avoid threats of using nuclear weapons. The US and the UK provided Ukraine with security guarantees, stating their readiness to assist the country in the event of aggression. However, the Budapest Memorandum lacked procedures and mechanisms for responding to violations, which made it an ineffective tool for ensuring Ukraine's security.